In this module on the workings of the Zenith V12 carburettor, we're going to focus on the fuel supply system within this fixed jet instrument. To do that, we need to remove the float bowl, which is held in by these two square-headed screws, and note that one of the screws itself has a square end, which will be helpful in a later module when we come to looking at the fuel delivery side and removing jets. The float bowl itself simply lifts off once one has removed those, and we can now see the primary components of the fuel supply side of the carburettor. So attached to here is a banjo with a solid copper pipe leading down to the fuel pump, and as you can see, there is a hole here through which the fuel is delivered into the carburettor and is sealed by these fibre washers. A good tip if you're working on your carburettor is to replace these fibre washers by a more modern rubber lipped washer called a Doughty washer, which requires far less torque to achieve a good seal. The fuel enters via this port and goes through the filter, and this is the final defence that the carburettor has against any dirt in the fuel. Removing that screw allows this gauze arrangement to be removed and flushed out, and is worth doing every year or so to make sure that that final defence is intact. The fuel then flows through a needle valve. So the fuel is coming in through here. This valve is important not only for the flow of fuel, but in regulating the height of the fuel inside the float chamber, and that height is regulated by the width of the washer. So an important part of getting a carburettor correctly set up is to have the correct sized aluminium washer in order to get the float, the fuel level at the correct floating level. The final part of the fuel supply system is the float, which is held inside the bowl, and this is a brass float that simply pivots, and when fuel is at the right level it cuts off the supply on the needle valve. You can see the needle valve pushes onto that pad there. If this float gets punctured, clearly it will not achieve the floatings required to cut off the fuel, and the car will flood. So that inlet gauze, the needle valve and the float comprise the fuel supply side of the Zenith carburettor.